Highness, your humble servant returns. When your homeland returns to this world, we shall revel in its glory.
For the longest time, the scene you just watched has seemed obscure or forgotten, left largely unexplored or maybe even ignored by many, despite what appears to be the statement of one of our siblings' primary objectives, that being the return of her homeland. I've long proposed the idea that the Gnostic Chorus may not be a link to our travelers, but instead reflective of someone else who came before them. But the more we've learned over the past year, particularly within Genshin Impact version 2.4, the more I believe the tale of the two heirs is indeed representative of our twins. In this theory, I'm going to use the structure of Greek mythology, overlain with the events of Teyvat in conjunction with the details we learned throughout the texts and quests of Enkanomiya, to reveal why the former Byakuyakuku might just be the former kingdom in the heavens, and maybe the very homeland our sibling intends to return to the skies of Teyvat before engulfing the thrones of Celestia. In order to properly explain the process by which I believe Byakuyakuku fell, I feel it would be best to first explain what was quickly established as the clear inspiration for Teyvat's history, Greek mythology. So, I'm going to quickly break down one interpretation of this mythology, but it is important to note that it has several different variations of events, which can cause variation in the origins and placements of its respective gods. What will be discussed here is just taken from the one interpretation that I believe most personifies Teyvat. Greek mythology begins with a period of time, or entity, known as chaos. Chaos is often depicted as a great nothingness, or a void, but also as the only being or thing in the universe. From chaos came the primordial gods. Among these includes Phanes, who is said to be the primordial creator of everything, and sometimes depicted in human form, wrapped in a coiled snake. Then came Gaia, who represents the earth, and Tartarus, which represents the underworld. From Gaia came Uranus, who represented the sky. Later, from the union of earth and sky, came many more children, making up the next branch of gods, the Titans, who are said to have killed and eaten Phanes, absorbing and distributing Phanes' power amongst the Titans. But the Titans were not alone in this time. There were also the Cyclops and the Hecatoncheires, born from the union of earth and sky as well. But Uranus considered these two groups of children too ugly to live among them in the heavens and banished them to Tartarus, the prison of the gods. Descriptions of Tartarus describe it to be located in the great abyss, beyond the depths of even Hades or Hell itself. The act of exiling each of these children is said to have caused Gaia great pain. So in response to this, Gaia hatches a plan to stop Uranus from bringing her further harm, requiring the help of her children, the aforementioned 12 Titans. Of those, only the youngest of them would come to the aid of their mother, Cronus. The plan succeeds. Cronus would soon replace Uranus as the ruler of the gods, having many children of his own, giving way to the next branch of gods, the Olympians. But the Olympian gods, who are also known as the hero gods, faced their own problems. Fearing that he too would be overthrown one day, they were each consumed by their father Cronus at birth. That is until their mother, Rhea, like Gaia in the generation before, hatched a plan to save her sixth child, Zeus. When Cronus descended to consume Zeus, Rhea presented the god with a swaddled stone instead of the child. Consuming it whole, Cronus was none the wiser, and this would allow Rhea to hide Zeus away, providing him the valuable opportunity to later return and wage a great war against Cronus, in time overthrowing and exiling his father to Tartarus, officially making Zeus the final king of the gods, and kicking off the era of the Olympian gods as well as a prolonged period of peace. Now, with that outlined, let's move back to Teyvat and dive a bit into the details which will begin to highlight Teyvat's similarities to what was just described. This will help me to illustrate why it could be Byakuyakuku that our sibling intends to return to Teyvat. From the text of Before Sun and Moon, we learned a good deal about the order of events regarding the creation of Teyvat, which seemingly begins with the reign of the 7 Dragon Lords, also known as the 7 Sovereigns. They were defeated by a god from another world, known as the Primordial One, following 40 years of battle. This could be seen as the time of chaos from Greek mythology, as humans seem not to have existed there just as in Greek myth. Regardless, the Primordial One having vanquished the Dragon Lords, created 4 shades of itself, establishing the first throne in the heavens, beginning the era of the primordial gods. But the earth remade anew for the sake of humanity. After 400 years, that earth was ready, and humans would finally appear. The primordial one, also referenced to have possibly been named Phanes by the scribe of the shade Istaroth, held its creation in high regard, and it is written that it would rejoice so long as they were happy. Thus an agreement was made. If humanity would not succumb to temptation, all they would ever need would be provided. And so, Teyvat, the Ark, a physical safe haven for humanity, upon which the people were to be protected and cared for, was opened to humanity. This marked the beginning of what could represent the era of Titans, and like in Greek mythology, this era too was one of war, as after an unspecified amount of time, a second throne in the heavens arrived, and the world would become engulfed once more. During this time of war, the covenant between the kingdom in the heavens and the primordial one was broken. Similarly to Uranus with the Cyclops and Hecatoncheires, the humans, who were once the closest to the primordial gods, living amongst them in the kingdom of the heavens, were imprisoned in the depths of the abyss. But one of the 4 shades did not forsake the doomed kingdom. The shade Istaroth, which commanded the powers of wind and time, and would be referred to by the people as Kairos, the god of moments, and the Tokyo Okami, would continue to speak with the Forsaken Kingdom, granting her wisdom to some of its inhabitants, and helping them to survive in the depths. It is also of significant interest to point out here that as Greek mythology overlays with Teyvat in this aspect, a group from the era of the Titans, the Hecatoncheires, or the Cyclops, have now been banished to what is effectively Tartarus, and just as in Greek mythology, the Titans include the god Hyperion, also known as the god of light, and is the inspirational namesake of the Dainichi Mikoshi. With Byakuyakuku out of the picture, Celestia ascends as the one throne in the heavens, paving the way for thousands of years of war that would bring about the 7 Archons, and a relative period of peace, which follows. So even with all of this mythology and history of Teyvat discussed thus far, why exactly the covenant with the primordial one was broken remains unknown. However, if we look to the Gnostic Chorus, we can highlight a few details which may help us bring focus to the potential course of events that cost the Shining Kingdom its place in the heavens. First, the kingdom in the heavens itself. The story as described by the Animo Archon begins with, "Once there was a glorious kingdom established amongst the heavens." Leading the story off with the word once is easily dismissed as just a cliche way of beginning a story. But in this instance, it is a way of establishing that the kingdom in the heavens no longer exists. At least, not in the same capacity as it once did. In fact, our siblings' Abyss Mage servant very intentionally emphasizes that their intent is to return her homeland to Teyvat. If we consider Lumine, in this instance, as the first heir from the chorus, it would indicate that her proposed point of origin was at one time the kingdom in the skies above Teyvat in the past. It's also worth noting that Barbados uses the word established, again implying that it was not always there, and could be seen as further verbiage lending to the idea that it was a kingdom made for them by the primordial one. And this is congruent with the description of the creation of heaven by the primordial one of mythology. But I'll leave the gory details of that for my next theory, as the establishment of the kingdom and its arc are all well laid out by Venti in the manga. Next, we have the surface level comparison. Even though they are not a perfect match with regard to hairstyle and clothing, the 2 heirs depicted do still very much resemble Aether and Lumine. The first is tasked to find a relic known as the Genesis Pearl, a still largely unknown and ununderstood object of significance that may now possibly be more clearly defined as the object or source which represents the forbidden temptation outlawed by the primordial one. Here it becomes hard to ignore the parallels of the story for the Garden of Eden, in which Adam and Eve were forbidden to eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, and were later deceived into doing just that by a snake. In Teyvat's case, we can infer reasonably that the taboo itself was then the acquisition of knowledge, in the same way as was symbolized with the eating of the fruit from the tree of knowledge, but perhaps in our case, it was some specific knowledge which was forbidden. All this laid down, I established over a year ago my belief that even the kingdom of Salvan Dagnir, on the mountain now known as Dragonspine, met its end after exposure to forbidden knowledge. And within this context, the fresco on the mountain may depict one of the primordial god's shades, or even Fanez themselves, as the description suits what we see in Before Sun and Moon. Tempting the ruling king of humanity's abode in the heavens resolve with knowledge, whilst they harvest the ark for its bounties. This all brings me to the next aspect of the Gnostic Chorus to reanalyze: the deception. In the imagery of the Gnostic Chorus, the Genesis Pearl is wrapped in the coils of a snake, which is often a form symbolic of and associated with forbidden temptation. Interestingly enough, Fanez, as mentioned earlier, is often depicted wrapped in a snake, and we can see forms throughout Enkanomiya which appear to be half snake, as well as one which appears to be half wrapped in the coils of a snake. These seem to lend credibility to the chances of the connection with Fanez, or its shades, and as of 2.5, seems to connect this primordial god to the Vishaps in some way. The First Heir is said to have been deceived, her memories fading, and leading her into believing that she was the queen of the kingdom of darkness. It is in this moment, during the visuals of the Gnostic Chorus, in which the red light begins to descend. This I now feel could be a visual metaphor, representative of her unintentionally dooming her nation to the depths of the abyss. It's important to note here that the First Heir, which I'll now refer to as Lumine for the rest of the theory, was said not to have lost her memories, but rather they had instead faded, meaning that they are still there, but are like ancient text engraved in stone. It erodes with time. The shapes fade but remain to some extent. Whether one can decipher those shapes is often dependent on contextual clues. So then, Lumine does remember some aspects of her supposedly noble origins, which gives us better understanding and maybe a new way to look at the rush of memories Lumine experiences when she's informed that her brother Aether is still alive. In fact, we might even have another possible text in Teyvat that gives us insight into part of the First Heir's journey, that being Princess Mina in the Fallen Nation. I am compelled, however, to point out that Dainsleif, in Yaemiko's collected miscellany, recently sort of broke the fourth wall to dissuade such comparisons. But I think this is because we're getting close to the truth. As such, I refuse to believe that the symbolism throughout the text of Teyvat are not intentional.
John the non-believer!
Anyways, so in Princess Mina in the Fallen Nation, released by the Yae Publishing House, a princess goes on a journey with a samurai in search of the truth regarding a prophecy that establishes her as one that will bring forth the destruction of her nation. First, we should consider that the Yae Publishing House, as a business, would have a vested interest in rewriting smaller details, highlighting romance and changing the visual details such as hair color, and the assignment of titles such as samurai, in order to make it a more relatable story for those in the Nation of Eternity. So we can easily dismiss any oddities regarding visual discontinuity. If you consider their quest overall, the prophecy from the story could be the deception outlined within the Gnostic Chorus. The princess and her samurai companion, who I believe would have to be Dainsleif, due to the strong evidence which suggests a connection between them, bring about a self-fulfilling prophecy by finding the truth, which may have been contained within the Genesis Pearl. Learning of what is described in the story of Princess Mina as the true Avicii, a word on its own which means the lowest level of the realm of hell, and is in this case described as the truth behind the fires of the war that have swept across the world. If this knowledge was the taboo, she had broken the covenant and thus doomed her home to the depths. But what is that truth really? For now it is near impossible to tell, but it appears that Lumine is rather certain that she knows the intent of the second who came, as she tells Aether that she has had her journey, and that he will come to understand the truth just as she has, upon the completion of his own journey. That said, I have a strong suspicion as to why she might have been led to this action. That is to say, I believe I know who the deceiver was, and how this might tie into the infinite mysteries of Paimon. But as all of that is going a little beyond the scope of this theory, and will only convolute the details of this narrative, thus muddying the intended goal, I will save my thoughts on the deceiver for part 2 of this theory coming up in a couple weeks. Back on topic, it is also a peculiarity to note that the story of Princess Mina is described as one of romance, possibly an embellishment brought on by the likes of Yaemiko and her editors, but perhaps not, as the Teyvat chapter storyline trailer Travail provides this line from Dainsleif.
My memory has all but faded completely, But I will always remember how much she too loved these flowers.
This statement gives us a strong indication that what he remembers of the Princess of the Fallen Nation, he remembers fondly. And let us not forget that Aether and Lumine are shown in the trailer standing in a field of flowers. And it is that very same flower which Lumine wears in her hair to this day. Additionally, Lumine referred to Dainsleif simply as Dane in 1.4 when she finally reveals herself. Using a shortened version of his name potentially implies a certain kind of familiarity, much as it does when Paimon began to refer to him by the same shortened name. Lumine's harsh words stating that Dane is her enemy was met in response with a tone that felt to me like a statement of sadness.
Lumine.
If Dane too were once to have used such a term of familiarity for Lumine, could that name appropriately have been Mina? Perhaps that's a bit of a stretch, as he did not use that name for her when they met again, but maybe this is only because he knows that time is well in past. Regardless of Lumine's belief that she is the Queen of the Kingdom of Darkness, or the Princess of the Abyssal Order, or even one which was prophesied to destroy her home, she still desires to return her home to the lands of Teyvat. And so, if Byakuyakuku was this once thriving kingdom, to what end does she wish it to return? And is this in some way related to what we've done with the Dainichi Mikoshi in 2.5? Are we unwittingly cutting open a path so that Enkanomiya, the former nation of Byakuyakuku, can return to the skies above Teyvat? Perhaps. Another interesting detail that I feel is important to point out about Enkanomiya is that we've seen ghostly remnants from just about every nation we've traveled to so far, but only in Tsurumi, a nation which witnessed the arrival of the Second Throne and was destroyed by the Thunderbird, and Enkanomiya, a nation thrown into the abyss for seemingly breaking the taboo, have we not been able to actually see the forms of these figures. Could this be because the clothing style of this once shining kingdom was similar to our travelers? And by showing us as much, it would all but reveal the obvious connection. But one of the ghosts of Enkanomiya's son children mentions that they were tired of the way their people dress, and the traveler's clothing was something new. So it seems unlikely without the possibility of the involvement of a greater power. Finally, I need to discuss briefly the trailer We Will Be Reunited. This trailer establishes a great many ideas that have provided fuel for several of my traveler-focused theories. In it, the first words spoken by Lumine are,
Outlanders do not belong in this world.
For so long I have considered this a statement revealing her feelings of being cursed to remain in Teyvat, unwillingly, preventing her ability to travel to another world, and that she were not native to Teyvat. And perhaps that can be taken at face value to be true on some level, as Teyvat was a boon granted to humanity by the Primordial One. But what if her mission is only part of the deception at work? After the arrival of Celestia and the disappearance of the Primordial One, those which belong to the First Throne would now be considered as outlanders to the Celestial Overseers, a notion which would almost certainly be perceived as a false claim to those who belonged in the kingdom of the First Throne. This would call into question our travelers' entire description, and the idea of their ability to travel from one world to another. Maybe they were indeed a pair of siblings who once traveled the stars in search of the unknown, but a higher calling drew them back to their home in the skies of Teyvat, a land now in turmoil. But maybe they were more simply able to travel back and forth between the kingdom and the heavens in Teyvat, within the so-called microcosm of the universe mentioned in Before Sun and Moon. That could even help explain why our travelers are able to resonate with all of the elements simply by touching the statues of the 7 Archons, because the source of their powers are born of the same primordial being and are much more ancient, built on the pure state which the current generations of God's powers were derived from, a time before the Primordial One's powers were dispersed and divided amongst the Shades, and perhaps later the 7 Archons by the Second Throne. Throughout this theory, I've outlined several arguments for why I believe the former Byakuyakuku to be the once shining kingdom from the heavens, and why I believe it once to have been our traveler and siblings' home. If true, our traveler is hiding a lot more from us and Paimon than we ever thought, and Lumine, in her self-imposed war with destiny, could even be a resolute statement of her intent to undo the damage caused by the prophetical destruction, re-raising her homeland and utilizing a lost power to bring an end to the throne in the heavens. And there we have it. Lumine, the first heir of the kingdom in the heavens, may have been lured into obtaining the forbidden knowledge of the Genesis Pearl, dooming her homeland unknowingly, plunging it into the abyss, and similarly, plunging her into a revenge-filled war with destiny. In my next theory, I will further explore some of these ideas, as I discuss what I believe Aether's role to be as the second heir, and also why Paimon just might be the key to everything. After nearly 2 years on YouTube, the channel is at nearly 100,000 subscribers. But things have really slowed down over the past few months, making that goal rather elusive. So, it would really mean the world to me if you haven't already to hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to leave a like, as well as consider clicking the bell icon so that you are notified when my next theory goes live. All of that will really help me overcome the trials of the dreaded algorithm throughout 2022 and beyond. Thanks for watching Teyvat Historia. If you enjoyed this theory, check out part 2 soon, or one of these other videos. May the 7 guide you, travelers.